Hi, I'm Gigi Hale. My sister laughed in my face the night I told my family I was applying to Harvard. They all did, really, just in different ways. Grandma with her silence, my mom with her, let's be realistic, and Seraphine. Well, she took more than my dream. She took my name, my words, my place. And when Harvard showed up at our school, they weren't looking for her. But what happens to a family when the shadow stops standing still? What happens when the invisible one gets seen? Do they clap for you, or curse you for surviving? Sunday dinners in our house were never just meals, they were productions. The dining room transformed like a stage set, with Grandma Martha presiding at the head of the table like some kind of southern matriarch/judge, casting verdicts with a single side-eye. Mom would be buzzing around, nerves masked in hospitality, refilling glasses no one had emptied, adjusting place settings that had already been adjusted. And then there was Seraphine, ever the star of the show. She floated in like a commercial break between chaos, glossy and self-assured, her smile calibrated to perfection, her voice tuned just loud enough to remind everyone who really ran the room. The oak table groaned beneath the weight of expectations. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, warm rolls, every dish a tradition, every bite seasoned with subtext. The food was the same as it had been for years, but the air carried something sharper, a tension that grew stronger the longer you sat in it. I sat across from Seraphine, methodically pushing peas across my plate, shaping them into uneven rows, anything to keep my hands busy while I built up the courage to speak. 6 words, that's all. Just 6 syllables strung together. But they lodged in my throat like confession and rebellion blended into one. I'm applying to Harvard. I had written, rewritten, and poured every sleepless night into that essay, each sentence stitched with truth I'd never dared to say aloud. I kept it secret like a forbidden love, something sacred and fragile, too easily dismissed if seen too soon. The windows were cracked slightly open, letting in the soft sounds of Charleston in October. Leaves whispering along the sidewalks, wind rustling branches dressed in gold and fire, but inside, the room felt vacuum-sealed, like we were all trapped in reruns of a show that had stopped being funny long ago. I took a breath and set down my fork. I've decided to apply to Harvard, I said, voice even, but small. The silence didn't fall so much as it landed, a thud in the middle of mashed potatoes and buttered rolls. Seraphine froze mid-bite, her fork hovering like she was posing for a painting. Then, slowly, that smirk crept across her face, the one that always meant trouble wrapped in lip gloss. Harvard? She repeated, dragging the word out like it tasted funny. She tilted her head, letting her eyebrows arch in mock astonishment. Really? Grandma Martha chuckled, that same low, judgmental hum she gave the TV preacher whenever he said something progressive. Lord have mercy, she mumbled, dabbing the corner of her mouth with her napkin like she was witnessing a slow-motion disaster. Mom tried, bless her heart. She gave me a smile so thin it barely qualified. Let's be realistic, honey, she said softly, as if kindness could soften the blow. Harvard isn't exactly for everyone. The words didn't cut. It was the ease with which they were said, the swiftness, the familiarity of dismissal. I've been working on the essay for weeks, I replied, voice quieter but firm. Where? Seraphine asked, sugar-laced sarcasm dripping from every syllable. In your dream journal? Heat flooded my face, but I didn't flinch. In the library, I said. After school. I've been meeting with the college counselor, too. Seraphine sighed dramatically, like I had somehow inconvenienced her worldview. Well, aren't you just Little Miss Ambition? I wanted to throw my glass across the room. I wanted to scream that I wasn't trying to outshine her. I was just trying to exist outside her shadow. But instead, I folded my napkin and stared down at my plate, watching the gravy settle like still water. After dinner, while Seraphine posted a gym selfie in her favorite leggings and a perfectly filtered caption about Sunday strength, I stayed behind to clear the table. I needed the time. The repetition, plate, rinse, stack. It helped me think while the inside of my chest tried not to collapse. Later that night, I went to my desk to review my essay one more time. I had printed it at school, tucked it in a folder in the second drawer, my safest place. But when I opened the drawer, my stomach twisted. The folder was there. The paper was gone. Panic hit like a slap. I yanked open every drawer, checked under the desk, under my bed, rifled through my backpack twice. Nothing. Then, from the hallway, I heard her voice. Seraphine, laughing. "No worries," she said, giggling into her phone. "I submitted it already. They'll love it. Harvard is mine." I froze. The air in my lungs thinned. No, she wouldn't. Would she? I didn't have proof. Just a missing essay. Just Seraphine, smiling too wide all dinner, and the way she always made something hers if she wanted it badly enough. I stood in the kitchen an hour later, my hands trembling around a glass of water. Mom walked in, distracted, flipping through unopened mail. She barely looked up. "Mom?" I said, voice dry. "Yes, baby?" "Can I talk to you about Harvard?" I asked. "About what I said earlier?" She glanced up, offered a vague half-smile. Then Seraphine's voice floated down the hall again, this time louder, smug. "I told them I'm sending my essay tomorrow, but I actually sent it today. Gotta stay ahead of the curve, right?" Mom blinked, then looked back down at her bills. She didn't ask, didn't follow up, didn't notice the earthquake happening right in front of her. I walked back to my room and sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop cold and indifferent. I opened my documents. Nothing. The essay was gone, erased like it had never existed. All I had left was the buzzing in my ears, the betrayal thick as smoke. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the loud one, but I had been trying so hard to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time I'd be seen. And yet, she took it. My words, my voice, my shot. But something broke open that night. Not my hope, not my dreams, the silence. I looked at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. I wasn't invisible, not anymore, and I was done waiting for permission to exist. I stood in the hallway the next morning, still holding that damn note. "You didn't have the guts to say it right. I made it better. You're welcome." It was written in that loopy, performative handwriting Seraphine used for thank you cards and fake diary entries. As if the curl of her "why" could justify stealing something she didn't bleed over. I stuffed the note deep into my coat pocket as the bell rang. The school's overhead PA system crackled to life just as I reached my locker. Principal Conrad's voice echoed through the hallway with his usual robotic cheer. "Good morning, students, and a special congratulations to our very own Seraphine Vale, who has been selected as Charleston High's official nominee for the Harvard Honor Scholarship." My fingers stopped mid-turn on the lock. Applause erupted across the hallway. Some kids clapped out of habit, a few genuinely cheered, others just looked around, waiting to be told how to feel. Me? I went numb, not from shock, but recognition. This was exactly what Seraphine wanted. I barely remembered walking into homeroom. My body moved, but my head was still trapped in that announcement, each syllable replaying with cruel precision. Seraphine's name, not mine. In AP Lit, Ms. Quinn stood at the front of the room, pinning a fresh sheet of paper to the bulletin board labeled College Distinctions. In large block letters, Harvard nominee, Seraphine Vale. The same woman who once told me I had quiet brilliance didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, she turned to Seraphine with a smile that belonged on a cereal box commercial. "You're going to shine, sweetheart," she cooed. Seraphine, seated front and center like always, flashed that perfectly rehearsed modest grin. "I'll do my best," she said with a faux bashfulness that made my stomach turn. I sat in the back, my hands clenched under the desk. That board held my name in everything but ink. The bell eventually rang, and I walked the halls like a ghost, bumping into elbows and backpack straps without noticing. I just needed to make it to the end of the day. That was the only goal now. When I walked through our front door that evening, the smell of baked chicken hit me first, Grandma's Tuesday comfort meal. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked into the kitchen. Mom was stirring gravy, Grandma was folding napkins, and Seraphine was scrolling through her phone like she'd already moved into a dorm at Cambridge. I didn't wait this time. I wasn't going to ask for a moment. I was going to take it. "That essay," I began. "The one Seraphine submitted to Harvard, I wrote it." The room went still. Even the gravy stopped bubbling. Mom turned first. "What are you saying, baby?" I'm saying that Seraphine didn't write it. She took it from my desk. It was mine. Seraphine's eyes stayed locked on her phone, but her lips curled. You're confused, Gigi. I helped you with that essay months ago, remember? Maybe you're just mixing things up. My breath caught in my chest. Mom sighed, setting the spoon down gently. Honey, you're under a lot of pressure right now. I get that, but Seraphine's always had a gift. Maybe you should focus on schools that fit your strengths. Grandma Martha chimed in without missing a fold. Your sister's always been the bright one, baby. There's no shame in that. God gives each of us a role. My cheeks burned. My role isn't to be invisible. I left the kitchen before the tears could win. Back in my room, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour. I couldn't cry. Not again. Not when I needed my head clear. That night, while stuffing books into my backpack, I found something folded between the pages of my chemistry notebook. A note. I unfolded it slowly, already knowing who it was from. You didn't have the guts to say it right. I made it better. You're welcome. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but rage. Sharp, steady rage. She hadn't just stolen my essay. She'd rewritten my voice, repackaged my truth, and sold it with her smile. And now she was being applauded for it, by our school, our teachers, our family. And somehow, I was the one being told to be realistic. I crumpled the note and shoved it into the bottom of my bag, where it joined every other piece of proof no one cared to see. In the dark of my bedroom, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't go to social media, I didn't check emails, I just opened a blank document, a new essay, one only I would write. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it. What we choose not to see tells more about us than what we celebrate. That line stayed with me like the taste of burnt toast, bitter, clinging to everything, even the moments that should have been sweet. I'd scribbled it in my notebook the night I started rewriting my essay. The real one, the one I wouldn't show to anyone, not even to be praised, especially not to be stolen. I stayed after school every day that week, hiding in the back corner of the library where the fluorescent lights flickered and the heater coughed every few minutes. That little table by the dusty shelf labeled outdated reference texts became my sanctuary. No one ever came back there, not even the janitor. I used an old Chromebook the school let me borrow last year, and I created a Gmail account with a name no one in the family would recognize. Gigi Everett Hale. I hadn't used my father's name like that before, but it felt right. Like he was standing behind me, watching me finally pick up what he'd dropped before the world got in the way. The essay wasn't a revenge letter. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was a clear, relentless mirror. It said, I see who I am. I see who you've made me pretend to be. And I'm done pretending. The librarian, Mrs. Werner, always lingered near the checkout desk around 5 p.m., ready to shut everything down. She never asked why I stayed so late. Maybe she saw more than she let on. Maybe she had her own essays that were once taken from her. Whatever her reasons, she'd just nod when I passed her and whisper, "Lock up when you're done, sweetheart." The day I clicked submit on that application felt anticlimactic. There was no confetti, no music swelling, just the hum of a cheap computer and the smell of old carpet glue. But for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was being squeezed from the inside out. The next afternoon, back home, Grandma asked me to help her clean out the upstairs closet. It was the kind of task she assigned when she didn't want to admit she needed help bending or reaching, so she disguised it as character building. The hallway closet was stuffed with old photo albums, expired coupons, and boxes labeled in faded marker. One box near the back had a water stain along the bottom and the name Everett written on top. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it carefully. Inside were folders, loose pages, and a leather-bound journal with my dad's initials etched into the corner. One manila folder caught my eye. Ethics, E.H., scrawled across the top in his blocky handwriting. I opened it. The first page was a draft, dated almost 20 years ago. It was about medical ethics, resource allocation to be exact. My father had been trying to challenge the hospital's patient prioritization system, arguing that the poor often received lower care not because of logic, but because of ingrained assumptions. I turned the pages slowly, some marked with highlighter, others with angry margin notes. Toward the back, in red ink, one phrase was underlined 3 times. Don't let the roles they give you become the ceiling you can't break. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I read that line again. Then again. It was like a part of him had been bottled, waiting for me. Not Seraphine, not Mom, me. I tucked the paper into my sweater and closed the folder, then sat there in the half-lit hallway, surrounded by cardboard, wondering how many dreams in this house had been boxed and forgotten. Later that evening, I brought the paper into my room, placed it on my desk next to my essay draft, and just stared. I remembered a conversation with my father years ago, a warm spring night on the back porch. I couldn't have been older than 10. The stars had just started to peek out, and he was drinking tea with 2 sugar cubes. "Why didn't you go to Harvard, Daddy?" I had asked, swinging my legs. He chuckled, not bitterly, just matter of fact. "Because I had your sister to raise. Then you. And back then, they weren't too keen on letting folks like me walk through their gates without checking my shoes." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. "I never needed Harvard to prove I mattered," he said softly, looking out at the dark yard. "But I always hoped one of you would walk through those gates, and not because you had to, because you earned it." It had always sounded like he meant Seraphine. She was the golden child, the top grades, the choir solos. The one teachers pulled aside and said, "She's going places." But maybe he was looking at me when he said it. I pulled out a notebook and began to draft again, not for Harvard, but for me. I called it The Ethics of Recognition. The first sentence was clear as day. What we choose not to see tells more about us than what we celebrate. I let the words spill out after that, stories of overlooked moments, things whispered at dinner tables, gifts dismissed as coincidence. I wrote about how quiet doesn't mean incapable, how some of us weren't raised to shine but to support, and how dangerous that invisibility can be when it's mistaken for lack of substance. By midnight, I had a full outline, not a polished essay yet, but a map. I shut the notebook and placed it atop my father's folder. I didn't feel better, not yet, but I felt grounded. And in a house where I'd been floating above everyone else's expectations, feeling grounded was something close to peace. The blue glow of my laptop still lit up the corner of my room when I heard the mailbox clang shut just after 6 the next morning. Our mail carrier, Mr. Jenkins, always did the early rounds. He said it gave him the whole afternoon to fish. I usually ignored the mail, but something nudged me out of bed that day. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was my gut screaming before my brain caught up. I made it downstairs just in time to see Seraphine standing in the foyer, flipping through the envelopes. She wasn't dressed yet, just a silk robe and smugness. When she saw me, her hand hesitated for half a second on one letter, a cream-colored envelope with a crimson logo I didn't even need to read to recognize. It was addressed to Gigi Everett Hale. She stared at it like it had personally insulted her. "Don't even," I said, stepping forward. Seraphine tilted her head, lips parting just enough for that innocent act smile to creep out. "Oh, this. I thought it was a mistake. Funny how they used your middle name. I sent it, not through Mom, not through you, through the school's backup channel." She held the letter like it might stain her fingers. "Too bad. Looks like it came here, didn't it?" I reached out for it, but she pulled back, opening it on the spot. The envelope tore, and for a second, I almost lost control. But I didn't. I watched. She scanned it. Her expression didn't change, but I knew her well enough to recognize the twitch in her jaw. It wasn't good news, not bad either, just an acknowledgement of receipt. Harvard had my essay. They had it, they read it, and they knew my name. "Thanks for handling my mail," I said, as calmly as I could manage. "Maybe don't use our address if you want to play the solo act," she snapped. "Or did you think Harvard was going to knock on the window of the library basement?" I took the letter from her hand, folded it neatly, and walked away. That night, after dinner, which was unusually quiet and tensionless, almost performative, I brought the letter to Mom. I thought maybe just maybe, she'd see it as progress, something to be proud of. I expected resistance, yes, but not what I got. Mom stared at the paper, then at me. You used our home address for something you didn't tell anyone about? I didn't need permission, I said. I submitted independently. But to Harvard. After everything Seraphine's doing, what are they going to think? Two girls from the same house submitting two essays? It makes us look sloppy, confused. Or ambitious, I whispered. No, she said firmly. It makes us look like we don't know who we're backing. You used our house like a back door. Those words punched harder than I expected. It wasn't just disapproval, it was shame. Not for me, but for her. She wasn't angry about my action, she was embarrassed by the optics. We can't afford to look like a joke, she added. Grandma Martha, sitting at the table, didn't even flinch. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own brand of judgment. I walked out without another word. The next morning, I went to Mrs. Quinn's room before homeroom, clutching my notebook like it could protect me. She was sipping coffee and grading something with a red pen. I waited until she noticed me. Ms. Quinn, I was wondering if you'd consider writing me a letter of recommendation. She looked up slowly. For where? Harvard, I said. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she did. You're bright, Gigi, very bright. But your sister, she was unforgettable. That was the line, the one people used when they didn't want to say, you're not her. I know, I said softly. She didn't offer more, just smiled politely and went back to her papers. By third period, I wasn't angry anymore, just cold. I sat in the back of class, tuning out the lecture, staring at my folder with a blank expression. I wasn't going to win this the way they wanted me to. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to crawl to match the height of someone else's spotlight. After school, I took the long way home, cutting through the cemetery. It was quiet there. Still. I walked past the small headstone where Dad's name was carved. Everett Hale, 1969 to 2010. I paused for a moment, traced my fingers along the letters. I whispered, they don't see me, but I know you did. Back home, Seraphine was in her room, blasting music while humming along out of key. Grandma was knitting something, probably for Seraphine's future dorm. Mom was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice hushed, careful. I went up to my room, closed the door, and turned off the light. The letter from Harvard sat on my desk, unopened again. But this time, I didn't look at it. I opened my laptop instead. My essay stared back at me, the title bold and simple. The Ethics of Recognition. The cursor blinked. I hit submit. And then I opened my journal and wrote one sentence before closing it again. They erased me with words. I'll answer them with my own. The letter I slipped under her door sat untouched for hours. I know because I kept listening. Not because I was desperate for her attention or waiting for some tearful apology. Nothing that naive. I just happened to be in the hallway, folding laundry, reading a book I wasn't really absorbing, sitting against the wall with my back to her door, pretending not to care. But I was listening. Eventually, the soft scrape of paper reached my ears. No footsteps, no door creak, just that quiet drag of envelope on hardwood. Then, after a long pause, a short laugh, sharp and flat. The kind of sound people make when they read a joke that no one else would find funny. That was Seraphine. Everything was theater, even when the lights were off. And me? I was always the understudy, always the line she borrowed when she couldn't remember her own. I hadn't expected a reply. That letter wasn't for her anyway. It was for me. A record, a line in the sand drawn with ink and resolve, proof that I said what needed saying, even if no one else was ready to hear it. The next day was the school's annual showcase of excellence, a shiny open house where the district paraded its top students like trophies in a cabinet. Parents, donors, school board members, cameras, applause, a performance like always. I wasn't listed on the program, I wasn't presenting, but I had been asked to help set up like I always was. That was my unofficial job: arrange the chairs, test the mic, make other people look good, fade into the background like wallpaper no one bothered to replace. Seraphine, of course, was the highlight. Her name sat in bold font next to a 10-minute speech. Educational grit and the power of personal growth. You could almost laugh. I stayed out of the main room during her big moment, keeping close to the back exit, half hidden behind the school's dusty trophy case. One hand on my phone, the other gripped the strap of my backpack. Her voice floated through the loudspeakers, clear and self-assured, with just enough vulnerability to sound relatable. She was always good at sounding just humble enough. "You know," she said, voice warm and practiced, "my little sister is my biggest inspiration." Watching her struggle with confidence, with identity, it reminded me of where I came from and how far I've grown. A hush of appreciation rippled through the crowd, soft laughs, murmurs of approval. That collective hum people make when they think they're being moved. I could practically see the head nodding, the parents squeezing their kids' hands, the donors thinking how charming. I stood still, my jaw clenched. Not crying, just holding myself still enough to stop the shaking. Then came the applause. Big. Proud. Phones lifted in unison, cameras clicked, flash, flash. Teachers beamed, the principal had tears in his eyes, and Mom, our mom, stood front row, hands clasped under her chin like she was watching a miracle unfold. She'd cried when Seraphine said, "My little sister." Not when I said I want to go to Harvard, not when I told her I wrote that essay with everything I had left. Just now. For a line rehearsed by someone who took my story and made it hers. When the event ended, I helped fold the tables like I always did. Took down the school banner, gathered empty water bottles. On my way out, I passed a table stacked with copies of the student newsletter. Right there on the cover, a full-page photo of Seraphine at the podium, arms lifted like she was receiving light from the heavens. The caption underneath read, "Legacy in motion." Legacy. That word turned my stomach, not just for its weight, but for how easily it could be stolen. When I got home that evening, the house was filled with the smell of lemon cleaner and reheated leftovers. The framed photo on the mantel was new, bright, glossy, posed in front of the school banner. Seraphine in the center, Mom smiling beside her, Grandma in pearls and her favorite Sunday coat. I wasn't in it, not cropped from the edge, not blurred in the background, completely gone. "Where'd this come from?" I asked, pointing to it as I dropped my bag. Mom peeked up from the kitchen, towel in hand. "Oh, one of the teachers sent it over. Isn't it beautiful?" "I'm not in it." She paused, blinking. "Well, you weren't really part of the program, sweetheart. We didn't think you'd want to be in it. Didn't think I'd want to be in it. It didn't break me, the way it used to. I didn't feel cracked or forgotten. I felt precise, sharpened." That night, while Seraphine went out to celebrate her grit and growth with friends and flashing lights and a caption waiting to be posted, I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. This wasn't an essay. It was a record. I started with the earliest draft of my application essay. Every saved version. Every file name and date stamp. The printout I made at school 3 weeks ago. The version I emailed to myself. The note Seraphine left in my notebook a week later. The one that read, "Your words sound almost Ivy League now." I never thought much of it until now. Then I added the letter I'd slid under her door. The one she opened. The one that disappeared from my room. The timeline grew. 8 pages by midnight. Not just about the essay, but the pattern. The way she took my truths, my identity, my history, and made them her script. And smiled for cameras while I held the weight of being invisible. They were building a house of mirrors. I was building the flashlight. I printed one copy and tucked it into the back of my journal. The next morning, before school, I left another note on her desk. Not with venom, not a threat, just fact. Keep using me as your shadow, and I'll make you irrelevant in your own spotlight. I didn't wait for her reaction. I didn't hang around to see if the letter moved. I grabbed my bag, zipped my journal tight, and walked out the front door like I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. By lunch, Seraphine hadn't said a word. She knew I knew, and that was enough, for now. She didn't look up from her cereal bowl when I walked past her in the kitchen. I hadn't expected her to. I'd said what needed saying the night before, and she knew exactly what I meant. Seraphine always acted like she had the last word, but the look in her eyes told a different story. That edge of confidence was fraying. She was slipping, and I had no intention of saving her. After I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the morning drizzle, I paused for a second on the porch. The cool air sharpened everything, the sting in my fingers, the truth in my spine. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to fix this anymore. At school, my locker held a surprise, a plain envelope, no return address, no name, just taped neatly to the inside of the metal door like it had always belonged there. I looked around the hallway, but no one paid me any attention. Inside the envelope was a folded sheet of heavy cream-colored paper, the kind people use for real things, wills, admissions letters, or apologies you never expect. But this wasn't any of those. It was a research draft, typed in courier font, footnotes, cross-references. At the top, Ethical Policy Review, 2003, EHRA. My heart stopped. I flipped the page and saw handwriting in the margins, Dad's handwriting, and a sticky note in someone else's hand. You deserve to read this. R.A. Reuben Ashcroft. He was my father's old colleague. I remembered him faintly from Dad's funeral, a quiet man who kept his hands folded and his words sparse. He'd worked with Dad at the hospital before the board pushed my father's research aside in favor of more conventional protocols. I took the pages to the library and scanned every word, my hands trembling slightly. Dad had laid out a framework for ethical care redistribution in underserved communities. It was radical for its time, honest and challenging. And it had been ignored, or worse, silently used without credit. Some of the phrasing, the structure, the moral arguments, it was all familiar, because I had used those same themes in my essay, because I'd grown up hearing them, absorbing them like background music. Because they were part of me before I even had a name for them, and now, they were in Seraphine's version too. I opened my laptop, pulled up both files side by side, mine and the one she submitted, which I'd secretly copied from the school drive before it was deleted. I went line by line, comparing not just ideas, but cadence, language, rhetorical devices. It was clear. She hadn't just borrowed my words. She had echoed my father's legacy too. Whether knowingly or not, she had become the polished mouthpiece for two voices she had never earned. That night, I started building the file. I named it Recognition Report. Folder inside folder, essays, drafts, timestamps, screenshots, photos of the letter addressed to me, the envelope she tore open, her social media posts boasting about Harvard's interest. It was all there. I didn't make threats. I built a case. Saturday came, and with it, Seraphine's newest stunt, a brunch with her former teachers and a few neighbors. They called it a celebration of excellence. I wasn't invited, naturally. But I saw the photo later, her in a white blazer, holding a faux letter from Harvard in one hand and a mimosa in the other, smiling like she'd won a prize that didn't exist. The caption read, "So grateful to Harvard for reaching out, excited for what's next. # scholar life, # future leader." I read it 3 times. Then I saved the screenshot and added it to the report. The next morning, she was sitting at the counter, spreading cream cheese on a bagel, humming a pop song off-key. I walked past her slowly, my journal under my arm. As I reached for the fridge, I said quietly, "You've just confirmed everything I needed." She didn't flinch, didn't pause, just smiled and replied, "And you're still just watching." I turned slightly, just enough for her to see the edge of my grin. I hadn't smiled like that in months. Not with warmth, with control. That afternoon, I emailed a copy of the recognition report to 3 people, Principal Conrad, Dean Monroe at Harvard, and Reuben Ashcroft. I didn't include a message. No explanation, just the file. Let them read, let them ask their own questions. By Monday morning, my hands weren't shaking anymore. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. And now they would all have it. I sat in the 3rd row, dead center. The Charleston High Auditorium had never looked this polished. Draped banners, polished floors, even those old chipped wooden chairs buffed to a dull shine. You could smell fresh lemon wax clinging to the air like fake sincerity. Everything felt staged, because it was. Seraphine stood backstage, perfectly poised, practicing her smile in the reflection of a window. She had a new dress, off-white, slim fit, modest neckline, her version of "I'm prestigious but relatable." Mom and Grandma sat in the front row, center seats, practically glowing. Inez even had her hair curled and wore that pale blue blazer she saved for church and funerals. The program had been printed and placed on every seat. Scholarship Recognition Ceremony, in cursive. Seraphine's name in bold. I flipped through mine slowly, watching people file in around me. Teachers, board members, local news, even Ms. Quinn wore lipstick. Everything was built for her. Every person, every spotlight, every word. Then the principal's voice echoed over the speaker system. Please welcome our featured nominee, Mrs. Seraphine Vale, candidate for the Harvard Honors Program. Applause, cameras. Grandma clapped the hardest. I stayed seated. Before she could step on stage, a quiet hush swept the crowd. Someone at the edge of the auditorium motioned to the principal and handed him a folded note. I watched the way he frowned, adjusted his glasses, and stepped back to the mic. Before we proceed, he said, clearing his throat, we have an unexpected guest. Dean Alaric Monroe from Harvard University has arrived. That was the moment the air changed. Even Seraphine's heels stopped clicking mid-step. She turned around slowly. From the side door, a tall man in a charcoal suit entered. Distinguished, calm, but commanding. You didn't need an introduction to know who he was. He took the mic with no rush. Good evening, students, faculty, families, he began. I won't take up much time, but I do want to address something important before this ceremony continues. Murmurs stirred. Cameras pointed. Seraphine tried to smile again, but this time it didn't land. Dean Monroe opened a black leather folder and removed a printed essay. We recently received 2 applications from Charleston High. Both were excellent. One, however, stood out. Not just for content, but for context. He looked up. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Is Gigi Hale in the audience? The room exhaled sharply. My stomach flipped, but I raised my hand slowly. Seraphine's eyes went wide. Her posture wavered. Dean Monroe nodded once. Thank you. Gigi, I'd like to read a portion of your essay. May I? I nodded back. He glanced at the page and began. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to protect. Silence thickened. This student submitted independently, without school endorsement, without family backing. She relied only on her own words, her own story, and her own courage. Inez turned to Grandma. Miss Quinn blinked too fast. Even Seraphine looked smaller. Dean Monroe continued. Harvard is not only about academic excellence, it's about character, authenticity, and voice. Gigi Hale exemplifies those. The clapping didn't start right away. It was like the audience didn't know if they were allowed to shift loyalties in public. But then a teacher stood up. Then another. The ripple grew. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just breathed. I saw Mom cover her mouth with both hands, not because she was proud, because she was surprised. Seraphine took a single step back. Dean Monroe finished his remarks with poise. Congratulations, Ms. Hale. We'll be in touch formally. He stepped away from the mic. The principal cleared his throat again, awkwardly trying to regain control of the program, but no one was listening anymore. I stood up. Not to walk to the stage, but to leave. I didn't need their applause. That wasn't the point. I had said everything I needed without opening my mouth. As I turned to head down the aisle, I caught Seraphine's eyes. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. The damage was already done, and this time, not to me. I didn't move when Dean Monroe finished his sentence. I didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't blink too long. I just breathed. Even the breath felt earned. People around me clapped slowly, unsure whether it was safe to break the spell in the room. Ms. Quinn was still frozen in her seat, lips parted like she'd forgotten how to speak. Seraphine remained at the side of the stage, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. Dean Monroe stood tall, his words still lingering. We reviewed two submissions, identical passages. One was traced to Gigi Hale's original timestamp. The screen behind him flashed to life. On it, side-by-side comparisons. My original draft, her stolen version, metadata, submission logs, highlighted passages. The kind of evidence you don't argue with, you just absorb. He turned slowly to where Seraphine stood. I believe this belongs to the rightful applicant. He stepped forward and gently removed the crimson Harvard pin from Seraphine's lapel. The room gasped, not from the act, but from the finality of it. Then, he crossed the stage and without theatrics or flourish, pinned it to my collar. I looked down at it, small, polished, heavier than I expected. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. For a long moment, no one said anything. It was the silence that happens after a storm, the kind that lets you hear your own pulse. And then, the clapping started again. Stronger, more honest. I caught Mom's eyes in the crowd. She looked away quickly, but not before I saw the flicker of something that wasn't shame, wasn't pride, just confusion, like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't quite know what to do with it. Grandma Martha didn't move. She held her purse in her lap, fingers laced tightly, but her lips pressed into a flat line I recognized. Resignation. Not disappointment, not joy, just the quiet of someone who realized the narrative she believed in had shifted, permanently. Ms. Quinn stood up and left. No explanation, no apology. I didn't care. I walked off the stage on my own terms. No escort, no handshake. Just me. The pin still sat on my chest like a final punctuation mark. Later that night, back home, the house didn't hum the way it usually did. No TV noise, no dishes clinking, no Seraphine stomping around in heels or Mom filling the silence with shallow questions. I walked past Seraphine's room. The door was open, empty boxes on the bed. Her closet half cleared. She didn't say a word when she saw me in the hallway. She just zipped her suitcase and looked back at her mirror, where a post-it note still read, "You deserve this," in her handwriting. I wondered if she still believed it. Mom stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, not saying anything either. "You're letting her go?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She wants to stay with a friend for a while, thinks it'll help her reset. And you're okay with that?" Mom's voice was quieter than I expected. "I don't know what I'm okay with right now." That was the first honest thing I'd heard from her in weeks. I walked into the kitchen and found Grandma sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea. She looked up as I entered, nodded once. "Your father would have stood up today," she said, voice steady. "So do I." It hit me harder than it should have. I nodded back and sat across from her. "He wrote something," I said softly. "A letter. I found it." She didn't speak, just waited. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed with age, the corners soft from time. My name wasn't on it. Harvard's was. Inside, in my father's neat print, were words he never sent. Maybe he didn't think they'd matter. Or maybe he was waiting for someone else to send them for him. "I hope one day," he wrote, "someone with my last name walks through your gates. They'll be better than me." I read it again, then folded it gently and placed it in my journal, not because I needed proof, because it belonged with the rest of my truth. That night, in the quiet of my room, I didn't rehearse speeches, I didn't write essays, I didn't scroll through anyone else's life. I lay in bed and for the first time, let myself feel proud, not in spite of them, because of me. The next morning arrived wrapped in a silence so complete it nearly rang in my ears. Not the eerie kind, not hollow, but something rich and full. Like the house was breathing in for the first time after years of tension. No kitchen clatter, no Seraphine clacking past my bedroom door in heels and perfume thick enough to choke the hallway. Just the groaning of the house beams settling into a quieter version of what it once was. I sat on the edge of my bed, feet bare against the cool hardwood. The morning light crawled in through the blinds, stretching long shadows across the room. My journal lay beside me, spine cracked and well-worn, the folded letter from my father still tucked inside. I hadn't opened it since that night, but I could still hear his voice when I thought about it, those words written like a final breath after a lifetime of holding everything in. And this time, I didn't reach for my phone. No inbox refresh, no social media scroll, no obsessive checking to see if anyone liked my moment or mentioned my name. For once, the silence inside me matched the one outside. And for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't measuring myself by someone else's reaction. It was enough that Harvard had read my application, more than enough that they knew the words were mine. That afternoon, I packed light, just a duffel and my journal. The invitation had come weeks ago. Early action scholars were invited to spend a long weekend on campus. Orientation tours, panel discussions, dorm intros, the usual stuff. But in the fine print was something that had made me pause when I first read it. I'd been asked to participate in a student roundtable called Voices That Shifted Perspective. They didn't want a speech, no stage, no spotlight, just a conversation, a seat at the table. I didn't write out a script. I didn't rehearse in the mirror. I didn't even tell Mom until the day before. Grandma, however, was another story. She insisted on feeding me first. Strength food, she said, her famous pot roast with carrots so soft they practically dissolved on your tongue, served with cornbread and sweet tea strong enough to wake the dead. After lunch, she pressed a small St. Christopher medal into my hand, said it was for safe travels and bold steps. By 3, I was on the train north, heading toward Cambridge. The ride was long, but not in a way that made me restless. It gave me space to breathe, to sit with all of it. And for the first time, my hands didn't shake. My thoughts didn't spiral. I didn't rehearse or second guess. I just sat with myself. When I stepped onto Harvard's campus, the fall air had teeth, a crispness that bit into my jacket and made me pull my sleeves down. The building stood like old secrets, weathered and rooted. But I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like I had chosen to belong, not because someone handed it to me, but because I showed up anyway. The round table took place in a quiet room off the side of the library. Nothing fancy. Wood-paneled walls that smelled faintly of dust and varnish, tall windows that let in low sunlight, no microphones, no podium, just folding chairs and a semicircle of people who had no idea who I was yet. Students, admissions officers, a couple of faculty members, a mix of curious, tired, skeptical faces. When it was my turn, I didn't stand. I just sat forward and spoke. "My name is Gigi Hale," I said. "I applied here without recommendation letters, without a legacy name, and without a guidance counselor who even remembered my birthday." That got some raised eyebrows. But I had something that couldn't be manufactured or polished for someone else's comfort. I had a truth that was mine alone to tell. I let the pause settle in the room. I've learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most desperate to keep you small. They'll rewrite your memories, hijack your milestones, and make you feel like dreaming is a form of betrayal. I saw nods, slow, aching ones. But here's what I've come to understand. Silence doesn't protect you. Hiding doesn't earn you love. And legacy? It isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. One moment at a time. One truth at a time. When it was over, a few people approached me. Some students, one quiet faculty member who rested a hand gently on my arm and said, "That wasn't a story." That was a mirror. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded and smiled, the kind of smile that stays in your chest even after your face relaxes. On my way out, I stopped at the campus bookstore. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but a simple notebook caught my eye. Black cover, silver lettering. It read, "Begin Again." Back home that Sunday night, the house felt rearranged, not just physically, though there were signs of change everywhere. Seraphine's shoes no longer by the door, her perfume absent from the hallway. Mom was quieter. She moved from room to room like someone unsure where to land, but she wasn't avoiding me. That was new. Grandma sat on the porch, humming old gospel songs that fell out of key but never out of comfort, crocheting a new blanket that she claimed would bring color into this house again. After dinner, I found something slipped under my bedroom door. A photograph. It was our family photo, the one they had taken last Christmas. Except this time, I was in it. Not centered, not styled. I stood slightly to the side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But I was there. Present. Undeniable. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it simply read, "I see you now, Mom." I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just stared at it. Not for comfort, not for closure, but for confirmation that truth, when spoken clearly, refuses to be ignored. That night, I left my window open, letting the wind stir the edges of my curtains and chill the air. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not the rewriting of what happened, but the decision to stop shrinking for other people's comfort. To live unedited. Before turning out the light, I reached for my journal, its pages nearly full now, and wrote one final entry on the very last page. They took the picture without me once. But now, I have the whole frame. Sometimes, the people closest to you will rewrite your story before you even get the chance to live it. But truth, real, undeniable truth, has a way of finding its voice, even in silence. What would you do if someone you love stole your biggest dream? Have you ever been dismissed by your own family, only to rise anyway? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories just like this one.